I'm a sucker for a visual metaphor. This is Schrodinger's new edition. Schrodinger's nerd outrage. Schrodinger's baseless optimism. Schrodinger's aging hobbyist. Jim Erebus is doing his level best to demonstrate that old thought experiment about a cat in a box that is both alive and dead. I think this is a pretty good metaphor, actually, especially since the leaks came out last week for how the community views Horus Heresy. Simultaneously, everything is awesome and works super well, and then the game is changed and is destroyed forever. And then all the milder options in between, but if I had to guess, I think most of you are relatively sure the cat is dead. He's not dead. I filmed putting him in the box like 45 minutes ago, and he hasn't left. So let's be clear. Despite how hilarious some of these takes are, I'm not making this video to dunk on anyone for how they feel, especially after the Liber leaks last week. But while the metaphor fits for how we seem to feel, I don't actually think it's accurate to the actual state of the game. In the metaphor, heresy just is. And we're just waiting to see what happens. It's already whatever it will be. We just don't know yet. No wonder so many of us feel so gloomy. We need a better metaphor. God, you're heavy. Oh. Ship of Theseus. I bought this thing like 4 years ago to turn it into a battle wagon, and clearly that never went anywhere, but man, if I had, I wouldn't be able to use it as a fantastic prop now, so who's winning, you know? If you're unfamiliar with the Ship of Theseus thought experiment, a ship leaves for a long journey, and on the way has to be replaced, patched, repaired, plank by plank. The question is, at the end, is it still the same ship as more and more of it changes? Heresy has changed a lot over the last 13 years, but if we're lucky enough for it to last for another 13, it will change even more. But the only way that it will last that long is if we stop thinking about it as something whose end or existence is already determined and decide to embrace that change will come from this new edition and then hold the ship together by us being the good stewards. The rules, the looks, the models will change. But if we get to the core of what makes heresy so special and we can explain and share why our way is the best way to heresy, the game will do just fine. If we walk away, we lose control to shape its future, and the game will live on in some form, but we will have killed what makes heresy special to us. Heresy's community has always been what makes it special, both in the way that I think the people involved are so interconnected, and also the way that we generally agree about, if not the specific details, the overall vibe. And a vibe's not an easy thing to capture with, like, bullet points, so let me tell you a story that can maybe show you what a lot of people seem to think is the right way to play Heresy. It's March 2018 in Schaumburg, Illinois. Adepticon is the place to be for wargaming, and especially for Heresy. The larger community treats it as a premier destination, and people come in from all over the world. Two brothers from South Texas made the trip up to play in a doubles event, and ended up getting involved in what would become sort of a legendary game in Heresy history. Quote, "My brother and I were paired up to fight these two 40k rejects. I even went and asked the TOs for the event why their list was even allowed in this matchup, and why my brother and I were paired up against it. The response was, deal with it, and the reason we were paired up against it was, if anyone could beat the list, it would have been us." A quick note for the uninitiated: lists, army lists, detail the models that you're bringing to the game. Heresy is like any other game in that there are restrictions and guidelines for what you can and can't bring. 3.0 is going to make big changes about how all that works, but there's going to be a lot of discussions about it eventually, but that ends up being a big part of the game itself. Usually units have categories and types, and sometimes those types are even tied to a specific faction or identity of the army that you're playing. Beyond what you're just able to do, there's also what you'll want to do as well, and most of the time when planning for a game, you're trying to build a balanced list, which has a variety of models that can handle a wide variety of challenges. More maybe on discussions about this later. You'll notice some problems with list building strategies, but what's important to note for right now is that Josh and his brother Zach have very different list building ideas than their opponents. Quote, "My brother and I always play in the teams match with a themed list. When confronted about their cheese, our opponents just shrugged and said it was a legal list no matter how stupid it looked. A no-arms warhound on a sky shield pad next to a void generator. Not to mention all the other units under the sky shield, on the sky shield, under the warhound. Okay, some notes. This is a warhound titan. The model is about 9 inches tall, and if it's legit, it retails for over $700 from Forge World. Nowadays, there are lots of ways to get one similar to it, but back in Yon 2018, if you see something like this on the table, it's more likely that it's legit. No matter what, it was expensive, and so therefore not necessarily super common. A warhound was and is a bit of a sticky wicket for Horus Heresy because of the way it interacts with the board. It's one of the biggest models that can be played in a standard-sized game of Heresy. It's pretty tough, but not unkillable. It does, however, require certain types of units or focus in the list-building process to handle, which again, going to get more into this later. So the warhound is kind of tough. The biggest thing that's acceptable for friendly play, but it wasn't just the warhound. We had the warhound deployed on the board on top of a sky shield. The sky shield is a piece of terrain you can buy. It's like a large landing pad, which is designed, for things to land on. The sky shield had a couple of rules, and you could only benefit from one at a time. In these pictures here, you see these little fences on the side. If they're down, then the model helps you land on it more reliably in the game. And if it's up, it provides something called a 4+ cover save from shooting attacks, meaning that half of the time you are attacked from range, you ignore a damaging hit. It's not just the warhound. It's not just the warhound on the sky shield. It's the void generators. You see, void generators are useful because they create these imaginary safe zones, force fields, that extend 12 inches from the generator, and they've got to be destroyed by a pretty decently strong attack before you can even begin to shoot at the Warhound Titan. Each generator can have 3 fields, and after the fields are down, each of them has a chance at the end of the turn to come back. So if you don't kill all the force fields and then spend the resources to kill the generator itself, which also has a couple of hit points, you'll probably have to kill more shields next turn. But it's not just the Warhound and the Sky Shield and the Void Generators, it's also the Marines that are hiding on the base. This next part's going to be a little bit weird for the two of you who see this and don't build or play miniature games. A very practical necessity of miniatures are their bases. Without the base, they can't stand. It's difficult to understand where the model actually exists within the realm of the game. It ruins the illusion that you're trying to create. There's all sorts of really important things about the base of your model. You see, bases provide artistic and practical applications. Models have standard base sizes that try to represent the 3D space of your static model, essentially where it needs to be, how much space it needs to exist on the table. There's some variations in the rule, but essentially, like, if your model doesn't fit on its base on the table in that spot, then it doesn't have room to be. Because the base provides that standardization, you actually get some interesting artistic opportunities. As the technology for sculpting and mass-producing resin and plastic models gets better, the details of the models and the dynamism of the poses get better as well. So the bases themselves are often doctored up to improve the overall aesthetic of the model. Now, part of the rules of the game specify which bases go with which models. Standard Marines are on 32 mil bases, Terminators are on 40, etc. It goes from there. But Warhounds don't actually have a base. Unlike a lot of other models, if you do a great job of assembling these giant resin monstrosities, you should or could be able to balance it on its own. However, a lot of people opt for a base just for model safety, or also just for the additional artistic opportunity that having a base of that size on a model that cool allows. Now, despite all I've said before, about the wacky interactions, things that might seem unfair, this next part actually might be the biggest hang-up for a lot of the people who I talked to who witnessed or heard about this game. You see, once you put a model on a base, typically the base then counts as part of the model. You now measure from it, you engage with it when in contact. However, again, as the base is not necessarily specified and is definitely not required, then it effectively is a base that is not. Physically, it's part of the model. Artistically, it is part of the composition. As far as the mechanics of the game go, it does not exist. I want to tell you right now, this soft little paradox we've encountered is a very, very important part of what's going on. I actually think it's a big key in understanding Horus Heresy players. You see, one of the things that matters a lot to Horus Heresy is craft, and specifically adding, if not realism, investing something in attaching yourself a little bit to the narrative of the stories we actually like. So when you have a modeling choice or idea that actively thumbs its nose at the concept of trying to blend in, trying to feel like it's part of the story or narrative, that itself is really jarring, because it's not necessarily just about the game anymore. It's about not directly connecting with something that really matters to many of the players who walked by and saw this game. By our rules, then, our antagonists, villains is a little harsh, could maybe be forgiven for using all of the available space underneath the Warhound to hide their troops. After all, if the Warhound deserved a 50% cover bonus for terrain that almost nearly covered part of the model's shins, then shouldn't the Marines as well? There's just one problem left. Remember, part of the purpose of the base on every other model in the game is to be able to determine fully where it is in a given moment, and if there's no space for the base, there's no space for the model. Also then consider the landing pad, which again in narrative, name and rule exists to allow flying models to land. If the fence-looking thing on the side is down, it's for landing. If it's up, provides a defensive bonus for everything on the pad. But guess what? Big ol' base extended out too far for that function to engage. So this is where things get very interesting. If the physical base is not present, then the sky shield can fold up and everything works as intended. But even though the players chose to represent the model with a base, the game doesn't acknowledge it as existing. If Josh and his brother had charged up onto the sky shield, or if they had targeted any of the models underneath and the Titan players had claimed some sort of cover or benefit, then we would have a very different story here. We could look back on this specific moment in time and say, this is where the rules were broken. But as it didn't, and we can only guess what might have happened, the discussion is actually kind of moot. Let's presume then that all of this is perfectly legal, which it appears to be, even if it feels pretty bad. It's made worse by the fact that Josh and Zach played a list built in an entirely different way. Rather than looking for the most egregious rule combos and line-skirting nonsense, they brought a double militia list, which is, at the time especially, a less frequently played army. They're using lots of units that were not typically considered necessarily competitive. To Josh and his brother, this was how Heresy should be played, with a story, a focus on something other than winning at all costs, making worthwhile experience for yourself and your opponent. So clearly, to take a narrative mindset and walk into what feels a bit like a cutthroat contest, it's definitely going to be a bit off-putting. Josh said, quote, "It was the first time I made the comment, oh, y'all must have flunked out of the 40k tournament. They had no business in Heresy because it's not something that you would have seen on the battlefield. It was a stacked list just created to exploit rules, and I'd like to say it was the furthest thing from Heresy appropriate, but that's a false statement. They were Heresy inappropriate. They, their list, their attitude, their sportsmanship. They were there looking to beat face, not play the narrative. When we returned home, Monty made the Ultimate Power shirt because the only way to combat this bullshit was to make a mockery of it." So that last part, yeah, there were t-shirts. I was maybe a little bit disingenuous in not explaining some of the context. You see, the Brothers De La Rosa weren't exactly just any random hobbyists at the convention. They were core members of a little group called the Forgotten Legion, or TFL. The group gets started in about 2014 and gets big fast. TFL was huge in the American Heresy scene. Nobody else at the time was doing Heresy games with commentary, at that level anyway, and you can still go and watch some of their old content on YouTube. And some of the stuff, it's wacky, at times it's very not safe for work, but it's also clearly a project of love, with passion for the game, the hobby, and the community. They sponsored international Heresy events. They raised literally tens of thousands of dollars for wounded veterans and Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. At one point, they were even approached by Spiky Bits to be their Heresy contributors. And after initially agreeing to do it in order to broaden their exposure, they wisely thought better. A good call, boys. But it's also clearly a project of love, with passion for the game, the hobby, and the community. The point is that all opinions being equal, maybe Josh and Zach's opinions were a little more equal at the time. They had a platform and a vision for the way the game should work, and they, along with their friends, broadcast and helped shape that vision. And as Josh mentions, they have a plan when they get home. Their friend Monty, also of the Forgotten Legion and Radio Free Istvan, creates these shirts. And then it becomes a joke and a meme. It's talked about on Heresy podcasts, on Facebook, and at the next Adepticon a year later, the joke is kept going with trophies printed to look like that Titan. This very unpleasant game of clashing values becomes a meme, and obviously an important enough one that we're still talking about it right now. In the process of writing this video, I became convinced that I should do a deeper dive into the history of the core values that this heresy community seems to value, as I want to try to find out kind of exactly where it all comes from. Ultimately, for now, it really doesn't matter. In 2018, Josh and Zach are in tune with the community, and they have an established set of beliefs and values, all of which they believe are violated by this game. By the standards of the community, the army is not story-driven or experience-driven. If the good guys had won, then it would just be another awkward game. However, it instead exists as a perfect example of wrong, the shining paragon of the opposite of the right way to play, the triumvirate of hobby, narrative, and the communal experience. For many in this space, especially the people who are making content and podcasts and planning events like Adepticon, these are the right values to steer the ship. The guidance of the community is so important because of the concept of social constructs. This is probably a term you've heard before. In short, social constructs are a concept or idea that exists because a community decides that it is so, sometimes in conflict with basic reality. In the eyes of many in the community, Zach and Josh lose the game in a traditional sense, but remain the actual winners because they uphold the ideals of the game. So in this way, and because they are both on the pulse of and helping to promote the soul of the game, we have a situation where the community essentially redefines a win. A game can only be won if you play the right way. Why should that be interesting to us? This definition of win comes from ourselves. The community and its values help construct this new idea. Zach, Josh, Monty, and Chris put this idea out there. But it is only because a large part of the global community accepts this idea that it really comes into being. So now is the time to introduce the first glimmer of an idea for this video. Back in December of 2022, I was snared by maybe the best title for a video ever. It's rude to suck at World of Warcraft. If you're not a fan of the Folding Ideas channel already, you should go become one. Or at the very least, watch the video that I'm referencing. It's going to be linked here. Especially if you ever played World of Warcraft, especially if you're an old head like me who played it at launch and then had to quit eventually because you got old. To start with, we're going to talk about a couple of terms which are essential to understand what Dan and Folding Ideas are trying to find with World of Warcraft and what we're trying to do to find the right way to play, what that even means. The Folding Ideas team focuses on free and instrumental play. The original distinction of instrumental versus free play, it all comes from a guy named Wolfgang Iser, and his work primarily seems to be focusing on the moment that play changes from the sort of, entirely unplanned chaos that is essentially kids just messing around, to the structure of something that actually starts to look like an actual game. However, the Folding Ideas team is specifically interested in video games, not kids spinning in a field till they throw up, so they bring in the work of another scholar, T.L. Taylor, to make it connect to video games. Here's a clip.
Its discussion in relation to video games is credited to sociologist T.L. Taylor in her 2006 book Play Between Worlds. Instrumental play is a goal-oriented approach that values efficiency, expertise, and optimizing strategies as part of play. In instrumental play, the point of playing is not to reach the end, but to find the best way of getting there.
I'd like us to focus in on the best way at this point. This might sound like semantics, but we've been talking about finding and promoting the right way to play Heresy. It's easy for you to hear the best practice or right way to play and imagine that you're hearing something else. Despite what you might be thinking, I did not include the story of the Ultimate Power game to make a distinction between good and bad players. The Titan players brought a legal list, played the game, and won. The De La Rosa brothers lost, but also, Zach and Josh played the way that Heresy players are asked to play and rewarded by playing. So they won. It's as if two different games were played at the same time. So how's this supposed to make sense? In any video game, including World of Warcraft, there are very strongly suggested right ways to play. And then also, there's big consequences if you don't follow along. Clearing a level is what allows you to go on to the next one. Winning in player versus player combat gets you better rewards. The game tells you strongly what it wants you to do. Games and missions in the Heresy rulebooks, they tell you the stats and the models, the missions, the way they interact, how scoring works, and it does tell you how to win, but it never really actually tells you that you need to, specifically. And realistically, a lot of us have gotten really good at playing this game for a long time without winning much anyway, so that's us. The thing is that even if it did tell us that we had to win, it probably wouldn't matter because that is a goal that Games Workshop really has no way to enforce. World of Warcraft, online service video games, really any video game, the whole concept exists within that server or game world, and the publisher has total control over any choice you make there. At any point in time, they can change the game to disallow one thing or insert a new avenue of play. It might not feel like it, but take a second to realize the Games Workshop does not actually have that same direct control over our population. Not only does their model of influence limit their ability to encourage us how to play, but it also limits their ability to even understand how well we've gotten their messages. There are many different ways to play World of Warcraft, clearly definable as separate. Player versus player sees users pitted against each other in a variety of ways. Player versus environment shows users working together to overcome achievable challenges set by the program, and role players do... I'll be honest, I'm not exactly sure what roleplay does in World of Warcraft, but it's been around since game launch, so clearly it's working for them. One benefit that a game publisher, Blizzard in this case, has in helping to shape or refine the massive variety of playstyles comes from the very nature of an online service game. Every bit of chat, every keystroke, all the data comes directly into the hands of the game maker. Even in player versus player combat, you compete by sending input to the central machine, and it interprets the success or failure of your game. The publisher is always in the middle of it. Just because the publisher knows everything does not mean that they have sole control. Users still get to decide if they wish to follow along with a prescribed style of play or do their own thing. Part of these variations can come about because of the existence of paratexts. They can be online guides, YouTube videos, podcasts, forum or web community posts, social media, whatever. So the definition of paratext that we're going to be using here comes from Consalvo and cheating, gaining advantage in video games. The definition says, paratexts surround, shape, support, and provide context for texts. They may alter the meaning of texts, further enhance meanings, or provide challenges to sedimented meanings. So the paratext is basically anything that encourages a different reading of the text. Basically suggests that you look at it a different way. Now, there are a lot of different ways to think about this. In my classroom at school, I've got multiple copies of Friday Night Lights from different editions. And some of them have updated graphics, some of them have the original image that was on when the book was published in 1985. Some of them have a little blurb on there that says, now a famous hit TV show, because classroom materials are old. Anyway, the point is that each of them attempts a slightly different method of trying to persuade you to read the book or what you think about it. For Warhammer, of course, we're talking about podcasts. We're talking about groups that discuss how you want to be thinking about things, to discuss what's best practice, what's worst practice, and also the culture that can spring up around a game. While Blizzard gets the advantage of existing within the actual world of the game, paratexts are many, varied, and oftentimes personalized, and can be regularly interacted with. In this situation, then, paratexts also create their own feedback loop so that all parties are in communication. Most companies work to have interactions with the most popular influencers, or maybe think of them as paratext creators that surround their brand, which is important because of all the power that those paratexts can wield. Even if not directly involved with each other, both groups are working to understand and impress meaning upon the users. Now, let's try to map out the same relationship with heresy. I figure that Games Workshop has three big ways of communicating intent with the audience. Hobby, through the models, tool, terrain, etc. Narrative, through lore, novels and fiction. And then the rules they write. For us, this is Libers, journals, maybe community articles, etc. Now again, to the same model, Games Workshop and all their heresy paratext works to explain and define how you interact with these three big pillars. But there's a clear problem here, as Games Workshop cannot have the direct oversight of us in their community because we don't interact like that. Now, if heresy moves to a 3-year continuous cycle going forward, this might change, but historically, heresy has been updated very slowly and gotten very little clarification for rules issues and complaints. FAQs are rare or non-existent, and so the relationship with paratext becomes even more important. YouTube videos, podcasts, Facebook groups are often the first place a heresy player will go to ask a question because you've got a hell of a better chance of actually getting it answered, and so the power and influence of the paratext grows dramatically. This doesn't mean that within video games, Blizzard is answering questions from players all the time, but Blizzard has data that it can use to predict problems more accurately, and so sometimes can fix or adjust things as needed in a way that, again, just doesn't work for Games Workshop. If that doesn't make sense, think about it in a different way. Imagine that these three circles contain all of the possible ways that a player might interpret the right way to play from Games Workshop. I'm talking every idea from the knowest of brainer calls to the pants-shitting insane. In the realm of possibility, all of the realm of possibility, you can see and have hobbyists who airbrush, varnish, use oils, sculpt their own models, and then people who don't even bother gluing guns onto their unprimed gray because they don't want to be tied down to a specific choice. For narrative players, you can have people like the individual I just saw on Facebook the other day who was going to make a force specifically representing Garrow and his 70 Marines who fled Istvan III to warn the Emperor, which is awesome. And then you have people who are almost confident that they know who the Emperor is and what he's up to. You have rules people like who can recite tricky parts of the text, and then people like Dark Apostle Ben and myself who, if we can't find the right answer to a weird interaction quickly enough, we just roll for it on a 4+ and move on. These widely different examples are all possible largely because of the lack of clarification and oversight of the publisher and the ability of players to just make their own choice about how things work. Part of this variation can come from a very active decision to ignore one rule or tweak one thing, but it can also happen because of a miscommunication. Anyone who ever played telephone as a kid knows that when communication is primarily one-directional, it's very difficult or maybe even sometimes impossible to get clarification when a mistake has occurred. And then there's a long chain of discussion, and those mistakes slowly add up as more and more and more people chime in, and then by the end you're probably miles away from what the first speaker or author really intended. Now, whether it's because of intentional mistakes, accidental misinterpretations, or just the fact that you really can't engage with Games Workshop to clarify whatever you're looking for, there is a place where you can get clarification, as stated before, and that's the paratexts. And these are communications that go back and forth with people responding to emails, people commenting on videos, people talking even amongst their groups. And one of the things this does is that, there's still a wide range of possibilities that are totally allowed and honestly should be expected, but paratexts and that communication, that response going back and forth helps tighten that circle, helps get more close to an idealized version of the game, even though something like that is probably not even really possible. However, everything is much more clearly communicated. We can actually understand and be understood when we have things we want to say and express, and the game gets tighter as a result of that. So this discussion, communication, whatever, is much more efficient for an online game like Warcraft than it is for Heresy because, again, Warcraft is centralized, while Heresy is not. However, because the community is outside of immediate control of the original authors of Warhammer, we have a lot more power in deciding how to understand and to use their texts. And communities can be a lot of different things. Your local community, just who you hang out with and play, the larger online community of players, Facebook networks, people who run and organize events, and often a mix of a lot of different things. Maybe a local community which stays in touch with a much larger network. This is probably where most people talk and share their ideas and learn about the game. The community influences those who make paratexts like YouTube or whatever else, and it's where you have discussions about narrative, rules, and hobbying, and the best put forward ideas get to be tested by the group. I might be sitting here with a YouTube channel actively creating paratexts, but I'll never have as much of an impact on how you play the game as your immediate community. When the game happens, it happens with those people. And as all of you work together to figure it out, they're the one whose models, style of play, and preferences are going to directly influence how you learn and come to think of the game. By the way, those of you long teeth watching this video, this is why we need you people to stick around, boots on the ground and all that, to help guide a community, explain the reasons why we do things, and to help establish, well, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, it's time to talk about Okay. Now, many of you hear the word meta and instantly cringe. It's been a byword win for win-at-all-cost gaming for basically as long as I've been playing, which is a while. Most of the issues that Heresy players have with 40k come from the idea of chasing a meta. For the uninformed, meta or metagame usually means something that has to do with an extremely competitive angle of play, or maybe a benchmark to aim for if you want to compete at the top. But chasing the top isn't always what you're after. In Heresy 2.0, Contemptor dreadnots were so good. It's actually kind of hard to explain quickly how good they were. If you're new here, or if the trauma has made you forget, they were too good at shooting, too good at melee, they were too difficult to kill for too few points, and when you did kill them, they always exploded at a strength that was strong enough to instant kill most of the infantry in the game. They were also a fan favorite model for lovers of the game and the lore, so a compromise was made. Extremely unofficially, a rule of 3 was proposed. Legally, you could take way more than that really easily because of the way dreads fit into the Force organization chart. You could spam the hell out of them, but the 3 rule caught on. If you brought more than one Contemptor dread, or any dread per 1,000 points, although realistically people cared a little bit less about the Derrideos and I think the Leviathans, but if you brought more than 3 Contemptors, you were a dick, and you deserved ridicule. It is amazing to me that despite this not ever being presented by the publisher itself, the rule stuck. At Adepticon during the entirety of Heresy 2.0, you would walk by dozens of tables and commonly see 1 or 2 or 3 Contemptor dreads, but almost never would you see more. Now you might think this is proof that Heresy does not want a meta. We are intentionally ignoring or limiting one of the most powerful things you can do in the game. Incorrect. This is proof that Heresy does not interpret best way to play as meaning the easiest path to victory. This is an example of our meta. There are other answers of sort of community-imposed changes. For example, and especially at a convention, when you pick the side of table that you're going to play on, not by rolling the dice as is clearly stated by the rulebook, but based upon where you are standing when the match is announced, this is an established meta to not follow the rules, and instead do something else. Asa Timonen, a doctoral researcher associated with Tampere's University in Finland, says that we should redefine meta as the current popular way of playing in a willing or practiced way. Our community willed and practiced a limit that kept games fun. Games Workshop was willing to let us drown ourselves in Strength 9 AP 2 Brutal 3 attacks and endlessly overlapping Strength 8 explosions. We made the choice to stop that. Many other definitions for meta, both given and presumed, will usually include our old friend best in the wording, further aligning instrumental play with meta, but I think that's a mistake. Part of the reason is because of how paratexts actually work. Again, you're watching one right now. That's why many researchers will use the term metagame alongside another term, Paragame, which is essentially the game as it is influenced by outside sources. This is how correct differs from winning. This is how Josh and Zach win in 2018 despite losing the game. And it also shows just how important a united community can be in deciding the worth and value of a game. You seeing it? You seeing the point? This is at best 40% subtlety. This is where things get a little weird, though, because although paratext might be the thing that allows communities to shape themselves and become something else, why it's possible to win by losing, all of the stuff that is designed to change our opinions about heresy is by definition lesser than the original game itself. You can't change the understanding of Horus Heresy if you don't start within the pages of the Horus Heresy books themselves, or you got a friend who's already made that journey who can show you what you need to know. And we've seen some really passionate paratext from the community in the face of these leaks, and it's all in response to these new changes. Timeout. Sidebar. James Workshop, excuse me. When your community values customization and personalization, taking away all of their toys it's a choice. But regardless, all the players that we hope will make it to the promised land of craft and friendship, they still gotta start at the beginning of the texts of Heresy, which I will mention again, do not really make a strong push for a lot of the things that we hold dear, like hobby or craftsmanship within their pages. I should point out that communities enforce this freely by how they reward events. You will not likely get a Heresy trophy for trashing your opponents, but you will get awards for best painted, best sportsmanship, most cinematic moment, or doing the most to add to the collective narrative that an event is trying to build. So despite the strength of social contracts and the pressure that can come from applying those, all of our paratext is still tied up in the original game itself. So we are permanently lesser authorities on a lot of this stuff. Any changes GW decides to make to the game itself is entirely out of our power, at least initially. And this is one of the reasons why I think that gamers get so anxious and angry about change. In a lot of ways, rightly deserved this time around. People and communities could just refuse to play the new edition rules, as people inevitably do when any new game has an update, but that community will struggle to stay alive. The newest edition can always gain new players directly from the source, at the store, wherever. The traditionalists have to find and invite people in who want to disregard the current new thing and to intentionally isolate themselves. Even if those pockets of community do have a better take on the state of the game, even if they are right, it's really unfair to ask people to sacrifice for a loss they've never experienced. And actually, there's one other problem with this mentality. Severing yourself from the group removes you from the consensus. The limited bit of discussion the Games Workshop will have with its community is going to be exclusively about their newest thing. So we're not necessarily involved at all if we take a step back. Think back to the example earlier where I was talking about how Games Workshop misses out on a chance to give us formative feedback because they don't have a good way of collecting information from us. I mean, yeah, posts on Facebook comments and things like that, yeah, dramatic and in some specific situations helpful, but I mean, if you look at the stuff from the beginning of the video, it's not exactly clinical market research, is it? Instead, the common feedback cycle is going to consist of the paratext that you consume and the local friends that you interact with. Now, if you and your local group decide to stick with 2.0 because it's just enjoyable for you, then that's what you're going to do because you want to play with your friends. If actually literally everyone that I knew decided the same thing, I'd be compelled to stay back too. However, the paratext and the discussion will move on without us. The content being created about our specific old type of heresy will only inevitably grow smaller and smaller, drawing fewer and fewer new people into our style of things. And as time passes, inevitably our circle will grow smaller and diminish as well. Meanwhile, whatever heresy has become will just continue on and growing without us. You can bail out of the ship, but it won't stop sailing. I mentioned before that I actually first thought of this video back in the early days of 2nd edition. I saw people making all sorts of claims about what was heresy and what wasn't heresy in the face of, at the time, what was the biggest and most dramatic change to heresy that people probably could have imagined. So I thought to myself, we are always talking about how we know what's good for heresy, but I see plenty of arguing about anything in heresy spaces. So what do we really know? I put out a survey to get some simple information from Heresy players because I wanted to find some things out about the community that sometimes nonsensically seemed to view itself as a monolith. Here are the questions that I asked. I asked, how old are you? How long have you been wargaming? If you took breaks, count those years. How long have you been playing Horus Heresy? If you took breaks, count those years. How many Horus Heresy forces do you play? How many of your armies are fully painted? Where do you get your lore? With a drop-down menu to choose many options. Of these, what is your favorite place to get the lore information? Outside of conventions or events, how many games of Horus Heresy do you play a month? I asked them to count Titanicus, Aeronautica, Heresy, or Battlefleet Heresy as well. This was before Legion Imperialis. How big is your local group? Specifically in a normal year, how many different opponents do you play against? And then finally, how many wargaming events do you usually attend in a given year? We'll define an event as anything with more than 30 attendees and or anytime you play 3 or more games in a 2 to 3 day spread. I sent my survey in the Radio Free Istvan chat and the Heresy Accountability Buddies Facebook chat as well. I posted it on those Facebook groups pages along with 3 of the larger Heresy non-faction focused groups at the time. I posted it in every miniaturing Discord that I was a member of, and I promoted it on my own podcast and YouTube channel for 3 weeks. And in that time, I received 236 responses. Here's what I found out. Almost 91% of us are over 25, more than 60% of us are 33 and older. 42% of us have been wargaming more than 20 years. 85% of us have been playing for at least 5 years, and only one respondent, had been playing for less than a year. 43% of us have been playing Heresy for 1 to 5 years, that was me at the time, and 41.9% had been playing for 6 to 10 years, and the game has only been around for 13 as of today. But here's where things got really interesting for me. 26% of these respondents said they played Heresy, but they did not own a fully painted army. 60% of us play 0 to 1 game a month. I really messed up here. I should have changed this question to allow people to say that they average 0 a month, because I think we would have gotten some more interesting answers. When asking about the number of people in their gaming groups, the highest overall response was 4 to 7 people at 39.3%, and the second was 1 to 3 at 28.6%. 20% of us attend only one Heresy event like Adepticon a year, and just over 30% of us don't attend any. Now, why am I interested in this information? Some of this is stuff we already know. Heresy players are old. We've been doing this a long time. Many of us have had long histories with wargaming before this. I didn't ask it, but I'd hazard that most of us played 40k first and then moved over this way, but I can't say that for certain. We typically have relatively small circles of players in our groups, and we don't travel to many big events. Surprisingly, about a quarter of us don't have fully painted armies. I want to believe that this is incorrect due to sample sizing, and I can feel the rage of you hobby hawks out there at me stating this, but I think it might be true. There certainly are problems with this survey, but I doubt that the numbers would get better or be more interesting if the pool were to grow. First off, Heresy is largely built on Facebook, which is largely for people approaching or exceeding 40. I had a student this year say she got a Facebook account so she could post 1 picture a month of herself so that her grandmother would stop harassing her. Maybe grandma wants to play Heresy. Here's a problem. If we can't effectively reach people to instruct them on the solid pillars of good Heresy, then we can't expect people who don't know us to know what we're about. We can't expect them to know why we feel this passionately about it, and we can't be surprised if they do stumble into a convention or a friendly game day at the local shop with some sort of horrid monstrosity of a list. I asked this question in a Discord chat recently. How are people supposed to know the right way to play? And I was surprised by the number of people who said things like, be respectful and do your research. I have never asked for help twice from a person or a group who didn't want me there. And if we're not going to be there to answer questions, or if we're going to give answers like that, then the only people who are going to be providing answers are the influencers making trash clickbait or pushing for more competitive play or whatever the hell else. Our absence and withdrawal from the space guarantees this is exactly what the future of Heresy becomes. If we are old men telling old stories primarily on an old social media network where if we want to teach people about the right ways to play, they have to know to come find us and beg for our help, and there's an edition change upcoming that will create a major shift anyway, then where do we get the authority to decree what is right and wrong for Heresy? What opportunities are we missing? I made a point earlier to refer to the Titan pilots as the antagonists instead of villains, because they are different terms. Antagonist just means the person whose goals directly conflict with the protagonist, the main character. In the classic sense, for those couple of hours once a month or whatever where you actually get to play a game, your buddy is your antagonist. Villain means something else entirely. It implies an evil beyond just a simple bit of conflict. It's clear from my interview with the De La Rosa brothers that Josh, at least, viewed these guys as villains. That this wasn't just an example of a matched opponent, but someone whose actions were either through design or lack of care, trying not just to win, but to harm the game. As said earlier, this single game becomes more than just a random game, primarily because it's so easy to see what they did as a rejection of what makes Heresy unique, and because of the cold black and white vision that comes from that sort of thing, there gets to be a hero, and then there's got to be a villain. But in order to accept that our Canadian characters are here to destroy all that is good and holy, we first must be able to fully commit to going beyond the idea that this idea of Heresy that Josh and Zach represent is not just the right way to play, but to be able to claim that back in 2018, it was universally accepted already. Historians, if we're going to grant ourselves a title that none of us deserve, can talk about legacy and impact. Figuring out intent and motive is a lot trickier. I shared this whole story with Asa Timonen, and she pointed out one fundamental problem with everything. She said, a game cannot suit two different means, and you cannot change what someone considers fun. Now, I know Josh, and I know what Heresy means to him, and I happen to feel the same way. Or at least I think I do. When he and I got a chance to sit down and play a game across from one another back in 2023, we shared the same basic ideas about what the game should be, and it showed in our play. We rolled up an ambush mission, which meant that his Solar Auxilia armored company would be stuck in the middle of the board, surrounded on all sides by my iron hands. It would be relatively easy for me to charge on the first turn. In turn, that would have been very, very bad for the Solar Aux. So, in order to make the game more fun, we changed a number of things. We removed basically all the cover from the board because it was just going to make deployment and firing really difficult. When we closed in close, we decided that despite them not having rules to do so in 2nd edition, Josh should be able to throw grenades at all the Space Marines bearing down on him, because throwing grenades is cool. We played it loose, we didn't take it too seriously, and at the end I did concede because I didn't feel like I had done enough to win, and by all chances he should have really lost. This worked because we started on the same page, despite all of our changes. Timonen calls this a player agreement. Sure, there are times when people actively will attempt conflict with a disagreement about the game and how it works, but most of the time those disagreements come up organically and without any sort of premeditation. Most people sort of passively expect that their opponents or their friends or whoever is going to have the same basic understanding of the game as they will. So you don't necessarily know what kind of arguments you're going to get to, because that's oftentimes a little bit in your blind spot. So we assume they're villains, we think of them as villains. Realistically, it's possible that this is just a misunderstanding. Well, it's really good for the narrative to have them as sort of these faceless heels, as Zach put it, in the history of Horus Heresy, or certainly Adepticon. It's really unfortunate, though, that no one ever talked to these mysterious Canadians and just asked them what they were thinking, if they knew about the social norms that were being violated, and what their plan the whole time had been. So I did it. It took a little bit of doing, but the internet is forever, and so I got in touch with one of the players and asked him about his wargaming path, and it was a remarkably familiar story. Quote, I've been wargaming since I was 12, so a rather long time. It's mostly been GW games. I started with 40k and mostly played, and still mostly play, that, but I did dabble a bit in Warhammer Fantasy before AOS and Flames of War a bit too. 30k started for me when the Betrayal at Kalthbach set came out and everything wasn't expensive Forge World resin anymore. This part is interesting to me because my first Heresy army, the Iron Warriors, was also entirely Kalth supported. I never would have been able to get into the game otherwise. The economics of it are familiar, but also it seems that he was just playing to stay with his friends. Quote, 30k got really popular in my local area, Southern Ontario, towards the end of 6th Ed 40k. 40k's popularity really dropped around then since the game was such a mess, and remained down for 7th Ed as well, with 30k consequently growing in popularity. It wasn't that a 30k community was made, more so that the 40k community became a 30k one. We had a lot of 30k events here around that time, and they were mostly rather competitive. I loved the game and was really enjoying it over what 40k had become at the time. These sentences should say a lot to us. I spent a lot of time pointing out in part 2 that our community, our paratexts, have so much to do with how we view and act within our community. If this group had been playing 40k, had been playing it for a while, and then they have developed a definition of wargaming that means playing tough, it makes perfect sense that this is something that is just picked up and applied to Horus Heresy. It's not a problem for them, it's not a question for them, because this is what they already do. They're used to it, and they have their own ways of communicating these concepts. Quote, tournament practice always brought out the hard lists, but the vibe was always friendly. We were always clear about setting expectations for games. A casual or narrative setting could bring out lists that weren't hard tournament lists. If you were playing at a tournament or against someone preparing for one, you knew you'd be playing against something you'd expect to see there. Basically, you'd know what you were getting into with any particular game. Really, this is just a player agreement as mentioned by Timonen and implied by many others. If you're a competitive player, competitive is what you want. Games that are too easy are oftentimes disappointing to win. This is something that, I've been hearing this for a long time from my friends who are competitive in almost anything, whether it's wargaming or sports or whatever. The people who really want to get better, who want to be at the top, they want tough things. So the real question becomes, what did they expect when coming into Adepticon? I anticipated the same kind of vibe I'd get from the usual 40k crowd I was familiar with, competitive but still friendly, if that makes sense. For me in my local area, sportsmanship was more about how you acted during the game than what kind of list you brought. The singles and doubles event that year were advertised as a more competitive environment. The narrative events were clearly advertised as such, so that's the expectation I had going into it. So, Devon brings his list and his experience to Adepticon. At first in our discussion, Devon also said that the team's tournament was advertised as competitive. This was very surprising to me, as by the time I got to Devon, I already talked to a number of people who had been at Adepticon, played in the event or whatever, and no one had actually mentioned that specifically to me yet, so I was skeptical. However, I did a little bit of research. I'm going to post a screenshot of this document and also link to it in the video notes because it's probably going to be hard to read. It's listed here as a double event, but online, when you registered, and still to this day if you go to the Adepticon 2018 page, it says it's a teams tournament. I could not find anything else on Facebook or anywhere else that specifically suggested or had any guidelines about how competitive it was, so I asked Devon if it was possible that just having the word tournament in the title led him to think of it as a more competitive event, and he agreed that might have been it. So I asked a friend of mine, Zach. He's been running events at Adepticon for a while and been attending basically since it started as far as Heresy goes. He told me that the tournament name used to have a very different meaning. So as far as Adepticon had things set up, any event needed to be classed as a tournament, at least in the registration cart, for the event to even qualify for prize support. So there's a very practical reason for this term being used, even if it has nothing to do with the actual event itself. which is hilarious because as soon as this rule is changed, Heresy events dropped tournament concepts from their event descriptions. But is any first-time event goer going to know or anticipate the difference or the subtleties of that context? Of course not. And was Devon the only one running with a really mean list? He claims that all three of his opponents had efficient lists and were well piloted, including a Word-Bearer's Malefic Demon summoning list with a Porphyrion, and a Drop Pod list with the ability to do more Malefic Demon summoning. I tried to chase down those lists and found one person who said they had summoning, but they didn't really lean into it during the game. His only real memory in the game was feeling like nothing he could do would really threaten the Titan. I did talk to my friend Sean, who runs Bug Eaters in Omaha, and was also playing at this event. His list included a team-up between the Thousand Suns and the Custodes. They brought Magnus pre-nerf, a bunch of Sekhmet, and 10 of those super stupid Lascannon jet bikes that the Custodes had. How come there isn't a whole legend about what a prick Sean and his partner are? For me, there's just one more little clue about this whole thing, and it has to do with how I found Devon in the first place. Back at the start, we were talking about the composition of his army, and the Sky Shield part of it was a little bit problematic because it's not actually something that is specifically Heresy legal at that point. Devon reaches out online, talks to a tournament organizer, and asks about its inclusion, and he gets grudging permission. I asked him, quote, was it just, if it's allowed, or did you read hesitance on his part? And if so, did it make you double guess your decision to make this list choice? Here's what he had to say. Quote, sometimes the rules are something we don't like, but it is what it is. If the organizer doesn't like something, they don't have to allow it. Ultimately, it's their event, and the judge always has the final say. Interestingly, this did come up at the event, and I was asked not to put the Titan on the Sky Shield for the last game. Didn't change anything about its durability, since Ahriman could put up the invul on it with a psychic power. That's what I was doing before, but the singles version I played locally had Amon as well for invisibility, which was way more powerful. He played it invisible as well. He made the Titan invisible. Devon leans pretty heavily here, and later on the idea of the role of the TO, and maybe there's a point here. He does go through the effort to ask for permission. I asked publicly, since 40k events at the time had a problem of players showing up with a broken combo and a team TO email saying it was okay. Usually it led to bad feelings. The question was asked and answered publicly. Anyone else could have done exactly the same thing. Out of fairness, Devon does ask, and now everyone who sees this post knows that it's legal. And while Devon seems to rest pretty comfortably on anyone could have done it, nobody else did. I think it's clear that the organizer felt pressure to say yes as well. But I have not heard of one list that took it as far as Devon and his teammate did. Yes, Demon Spam was a possibility if you were optimized for it. Devon's opponent, who played Night Lords and Word Bearers, says that they intentionally pulled back from the grossest optimization of that tactic. Sean, who brought Murder God Magnus with Custode support, purposefully ran his Magnus into a pointless tar pit of a combat at one point in the tournament because his opponents weren't having a good time, and by all accounts during the game, Sean's partner was being a bit of a drunk ass. Just like with the Contemptor dreadnots, you can choose to do less for your opponent to enjoy more. You are not required to go full-on sweaty just because something is considered competitive. However, Devon learned Heresy in a community that went directly from hard tournament play to Heresy. He's a product of his community's values. And if that's where you learn, then that's what you know, unless someone else can show you a different and better way. Yeah, like if there was some sort of fun community that could share the values of hobby, lore, and a positive game experience for you and your opponent, even if the publisher of the game was doing wacky things to it. Trying to lay it on pretty thick here. But anyway, back to Devon the Destroyer. So there's this idea that he comes in and he and his partner are attempting to actually, do something to Horus Heresy as a community. Well, guess what? Back then, Devon didn't really do podcasts. He didn't really like looking things up on YouTube. He mostly just worked with his very large community and made things work from there. So he had no idea who Josh and Zach were. He didn't know who the Forgotten Legion was. For all intents and purposes, all of the stuff, all of the creation, the content, the paratext built by the Heresy community up to this point, the history of Adepticon Heresy, it might as well have not existed for Devon. And if it doesn't exist for Devon, how can he be expected to try to uphold those values? I still think that focusing on hobby, narrative, and the positive game experience are the right way to play Horus Heresy. I shared that belief with Josh and Zach, the previously mentioned Sean, and probably most of you. Like Devon, I didn't start with these ideas, but unlike him, I had people in a community to share them with me and to explain to me why they were the right way to go. It doesn't matter a lot where these ideas came from. What matters here is that these values continue to shape heresy as we move forward. And honestly, imagine how completely insulting it would be to walk into a conversation like this from the other side. If I've been growing a group in my town, playing games, developing things as I see fit, and then the response I get at an event is, "You're just dead-ass wrong," or "You're not real heresy," most people are not likely to give that kind of crap any sort of clear thinking. And if all of you old farts quit, we're leaving heresy exclusively in the hands of Games Workshop and the content creators out there who don't really actually love the game, but just want to see it as a way to make a buck. There is so much change in this edition. There is a lot of anger about these changes. I get that. But the community is still the community. It probably wouldn't surprise you to find out that the team that runs Adepticon and other big events are already paying attention to this. I'm not going to read it to you, but this is the message being sent out to Heresy players who are going to be attending the Michigan GT, which happens in October. The people who organize these events are going to do what they have to do to keep the classic culture that we have alive. The game will change, but the important core of it can still stay the same. The unavoidable truth, though, is that the game inevitably changes. Edition changes are hard because that change feels like it happens all at once, but the only way to keep the game alive and to keep the community viable is to find ways to make it grow. Look, the beauty of stories is that they change with every telling, and Heresy is just like that. The narrative we can tell about the table, the stories of good times we had with good friends, if we continue to show the positive aspects of that, by being the models of that kind of positivity, this community can figure all the other junk out. The new people who inevitably show up at tables after this edition launch need to be shown the ropes, but we have to remember that they're coming from some place that's special to them as well, and that every wargamer's journey is personal and important. People have to be able to see some themselves in the community, and they have to be able to bring something of themselves in, or they don't stay. Change does not equal loss. It can be enriching, even if it's uncomfortable. And even though we're old, we can still have a chance to steer the ship. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for watching this video, if you've made it this far into it. This has been a project that I've been conceptualizing, like I said, for almost 3 years. It took a lot of work, it took a lot of effort, and a lot of support from a lot of people to get it done. So I want to make sure to thank a few people who made all this possible. First of all, I need to thank Zach and Josh De La Rosa for being my first interviewees. When trying to figure out how I was going to bring in the concept of the Folding Ideas video into Horus Heresy, it was their story, the game that they played, that really helped me conceptualize it. Secondly, I guess I'd like to thank Dan Olson and Folding Ideas for the great video, It's Why It's Rude to Suck at World of Warcraft. That is definitely linked below. And again, I'll say also, if you are, or if you know anything about World of Warcraft, you should be watching that video. It was great. Thirdly, I want to thank Devon, who was our, I guess, heel for the whole story. It's not easy to hear things like that talked about, I am sure, but it makes for a really fascinating story. I think it's wild that people still talk about it now, and I appreciate that he took so much time to answer my questions, and he was a very good person to interview, so that was awesome. Next up, I want to thank some people on the academic side of things. Dr. Mikko Meriläinen and Asa Timonen of Tampere University in Finland. You were both very instrumental in making this happen as well, both with interviews, tips, and places to look. Both of these people have a body of work about games, miniaturing, and other things, and I didn't get to reference a lot of their stuff specifically because it ended up taking a very different turn and going in much more in-depth in a different place. Definitely an idea of a video I'm going to come back to in the future, but it didn't make the final cut. However, your support was essential, and thank you for that. I need to also thank a lot of friends who helped with guidance on this. I need to thank basically the entirety of the Radio Free Istvan Crusader chat, also the Harris Accountability Buddies chats. Both of those chats have been fielding just tons of random questions from me as I try to get contextualized on all these different things, especially going back into first edition. The Warhammer 40K has also provided some support in that regard. Thank you very much. Specifically, I want to thank Duncan from the Accountability Buddies. I want to thank Sean from Omaha. And I want to thank Kevin, the new East Coaster, for providing technical support and feedback on the scripts, which were 20 pages long and going, but they were very, very gracious to read over them and go over it with me. Again, if you read this far, this took probably, soft estimate, like a 200-hour project. And if you like this sort of content, as strange and as complex as it is, I need you to do something for me. I need you to like the video, comment on it maybe, and definitely, if you enjoyed it, get someone else to watch it too, because this is the sort of content that does not just go viral, or this is the sort of content that does not just accidentally get clicked on and viewed. So help me make weirder stuff. I was happy to do it, but please help support me in that regard in the future. Thanks a lot. More regular Horus Heresy programming coming your way soon. Thanks again also to the Patreons who support this, providing some of the money needed to run this channel. I really appreciate that as well. Hope you're all enjoying what today will be. Hopefully, if I get this thing out, day one of the new edition and a very exciting new future. You take care.